All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about just some reading statistics, how to help children fall in love with books. We want to foster the love of books in kids, and we want to use our books, obviously, to help them do that. And this is a great thing if you throw in some little tidbits at your home shows. Since I've been doing this, I've had people tell me, wow, I've been to Usborne shows before, but this was great, and I never felt like I got some of this information before. And I don't do it real intensively in my home shows. I don't just sit and kind of lecture them about, but I try and throw in tidbits here and there, depending on the ages of the kids, and talk about some of the ideas with some of our books. So that's why I have some books up here today as well. And this is geared a bit towards younger kids, infants through maybe kindergarten, first grade age, because it's about creating readers and fostering this love of books from a very young age in kids. Okay, so I always start off with a question, why is reading so important? And if any group of people knows that reading is important, I think it's probably us. So no one needs to lecture us in this room that reading is important. But I tell my people that there is a very simple formula, and it has been confirmed by research, so we're not just pulling it out of the air, that students who read the most also read the best, achieve the most, and stay in school the longest. And this is regardless of their gender, their nationality, their socioeconomic background, any other factors. Those who read the most do the best. It's very, very simple. And in fact, it's so important, and I know some of you have probably heard this. I know I found it in my research, and I know Dr. Titzer mentioned it last year at convention, that there are states in this country that look at reading scores in either second or fourth grade, and they look at kids and they say, okay, how many kids do we have in the state who are not reading at level? And they take that number and they factor it into determining the prison population that far down the road. So when they say, what capacity are we going to need in our penitentiaries, they use the number of kids who are not reading at level, because it has been shown that the kids who fall behind are the ones who are most likely to be incarcerated. So it's very, very scary. It's very important, of course, that kids learn to read and that they enjoy it. So a child's ability to read is really going to determine their success not only in school but in life. And a lot of parents think, okay, reading is a great thing, but they don't quite realize just how important it is. I mean, when you go to school, if you think about it, reading is important for every subject, whether it's reading math problems, whether it's following instructions to do science experiments, whether it's learning about history. It all boils down to a child's ability to read. And when they are younger, in the first 4 years of school, a lot of it's more oral, the teacher is speaking rather than reading assignments. They have to have the vocabulary and they have to have the background knowledge that they can understand and comprehend and then learn what the teacher is saying. If they don't have a very good vocabulary or they don't have some of this background knowledge that is assumed, they're going to struggle. And of course, reading also gives you those things. So when we're reading to our kids, we're giving them, and I'll talk a little bit more about vocabulary and background knowledge in a while. So how do we stimulate our children's interest in books? And I'm going to take this off because I don't like being trapped behind the podium. Okay. So how do we stimulate our child's interest in books and a desire to read? Because what we really want them to do is we want our kids, when they're bored or if it's a rainy day, we want them to get a book and cuddle up on the couch and have their little blankie and read. We don't necessarily want them, playing video games all the time or, always needing that external stimulation. Not that video games are bad. I have a Nintendo Wii now and I'm hooked on Mario Kart. So, but we want them to have that, you don't be like, why don't you read a book? I don't want to read a book. You don't want to have them do that. So we really want them to do that. And we want, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at reading as a pleasurable experience, right? You want reading to be pleasurable because we're human beings. We are pleasure-centered. That means if something gives us pleasure, we're going to do it because we want to. And if something does not give you pleasure, we don't want to do it. It's just basic human nature. So if reading is not pleasurable for kids, if it is not fun for kids, they are not going to do it. It just makes sense, right? And it's not just reading, it's anything in life. They're not going to do it. Now, reading is an accrued skill. It means the more you do it, the better you get. So if a child is not reading because they're not enjoying it, they're not going to get better at it. So if you have the kids who are reading and who are enjoying it, the more they read, the better they're going to get, and their skills are going to go up. And then you've got the kids that don't enjoy it because it's not fun, and they're not going to read, and their skills stay stagnant. So now the gap is getting bigger and bigger between those two groups of kids, and you're actually widening that gap. So we don't want that to happen. We want all the kids, of course, to do better. So those kids that don't like it are only going to do the minimum. So our job, whether it's as a parent, whether we're educating parents, whether you're a teacher, anyone, if you have children in your life, our job is really that we don't necessarily want to focus on teaching them how to read, but we want to focus on teaching them to want to read. Because if they want to read, the how is going to fall into place. Right? If they don't want to, that how they're going to learn is a whole lot more challenging. What we really want to do is we want to create lifetime readers. And unfortunately, a lot of times what are created in our society are school time readers. The kids that read for school because they have to, not the kids who read because they want to. And now, a few years back, the U.S. Department of Education funded a commission, and it was called the Commission on Reading. Has anyone heard of Commission on Reading? So the Commission on Reading, their job was to go out and to look at all the studies that were out there that had to do with reading. So they weren't doing their own studies. They were looking at studies that were out there. And over a period of about 2 years, they looked at 10,000 research studies, and they came up with 2 primary findings. So 10,000 studies, and there were 2 main things that they found. And the first one was that the single most important activity for success in reading is to read aloud to your children. So if you want your child to be successful in reading, you read aloud to them. There was not a mention of phonics drills, word memorization, workbooks, anything like that. Just to read aloud to them. And the second thing was that this practice of reading aloud should continue throughout all grades. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too. So it almost seems too simple, right? If you want your kids to be successful, what do? You read to them. Okay, I can do that, and the more you read to them, the better, that they get. Now, I just want to say, and this has been shown by research as well, because there's something called early fluent readers. And I'm very proud because my son is one of these. Early fluent readers are kids who go to kindergarten knowing how to read, having never had any formal instruction. Okay, so they just learn to read. And this is my son. One day he picked up a book and he just started to read. And his teacher said, "Do you know he can read?" And I said, "I guess." She said, "How'd you teach him?" I said, "I didn't teach him. I just read to him all the time." And when they look at early fluent readers, there's 4 factors that, I love it. As soon as I say 4 factors, everyone's like, 4 factors. Can I write down number 1? There's 4 factors that just about every single one of these kids have. And the number 1 factor is that they were read to on a regular basis. Okay, that's the most important thing. So that follows right in with the Commission on Reading's findings. The second is that they have a wide variety of printed material available in the home. So basically, you just flood your home with books, magazines, newspapers, anything like that. And the third one, and this one was very interesting to me, the third factor was that there was paper and pencil readily available. So they had easy access to it. Because if they're scribbling and writing, it helps make the connection in their brains between these, symbols on the paper and words. And it clicks then at some point. So as they're scribbling and they're trying to write, that makes them want to be able to read and write things that actually make sense. So that was the third one. And then the fourth one, and this is the one that's fun for us, is that they have an adult at home who's willing to answer those unending questions that they ask you about the books, and just be like, just read it and leave me alone. But the parents or the caregivers who, are going to be, answering questions and talking about the books and things with them. So again, it makes it more interesting. It brings it alive. They understand it. If you read something and you don't understand it, how much fun is it? But if you have someone who talks to you about it and explains maybe any words you don't know, or, you have some interaction and it cements it more and it makes it more pleasurable. So when you're reading aloud to your kids, it does all different things. And the first thing it does is it's conditioning your children to associate reading with pleasure, because now they're having this special time with mommy or daddy or the babysitter or whoever. And if it's a pleasurable experience, then they're going, again, we're pleasure-centered, to look at reading as pleasurable. You're going to provide a reading role model. If they see you reading and they see you valuing books, that's great. And this is especially important with boys and fathers. Boys do not have a lot of male role models when it comes to reading. Most of the time their teachers are males. Most of the time females. Teachers are female. Librarians are female. The moms are reading to them. So it's really important for them to see the fathers reading, whether reading the newspaper, reading a magazine, reading them bedtime stories. The boys really need that. So that's just a little side onto the boy aspect. And then, as I mentioned before, reading also helps with vocabulary and background knowledge. Now, a lot of people say, well, why do I have to read to them? Why can't I just talk to them? I'm talking to them, I'm using words, they're hearing words, that should be plenty. And it's really not, and here's why reading is important. There's something called the basic lexicon, and this is the 5,000 words that we use most in conversation. If you add the next 5,000, it's called the common lexicon. So that's 10,000 words, and 83% of the words that we speak in conversation are from this common lexicon, this 10,000 words. Anything beyond that they call rare words. So when you get into that realm of rare words, that's whenever you're starting to build vocabulary and introduce new things, new words and new vocabulary into a child's, or even your own repertoire. So when you are speaking, you don't use very many. And in fact, where's my little statistics here? An adult speaking to a child uses about 9 rare words per 1,000. Adult talking to an adult is a little bit higher, about 17 per 1,000. But if you look at children's books use 31 rare words per 1,000. And what I thought was very interesting, that adult books use just under 53, and comic books are like 53 and a half rare words per 1,000. So if you've got the boys who are reading the comic books, they actually get better vocabulary than like adult books. So you don't poo-poo the comic books if that's all the boys will read. So in printed text, they're getting so many more words and so much more vocabulary than they'd be getting, from you just speaking to them. And another thing is that the spoken word and the written English and spoken English are very, very different, right? So there's almost two versions of the language. You've got the spoken English, where we may not use the best grammar, sentence structure, and things like that, and then you've got the printed English, it's more standardized, and they're going to get better sentence structure and see that. And so now we're exposing them to more vocabulary, right? So we're reading them books, they're getting all this vocabulary, and vocabulary is very important. And actually by age 4, children understand 2/3 to 3/4 of the words that they're going to use in conversation the rest of their life. So the bigger vocabulary a child has at age 4, the more words that they're going to have at their disposal through their life. So a lot of these things that I'm talking about happen before a child even steps foot into school, or maybe they're in preschool, but before they even hit kindergarten, a lot of these things are set. So it's very, very important that we want the parents of our younger kids to understand how important it is. And you can't just wait till they go to kindergarten or wait till they go to first grade and expect the teachers to do it all. Does anyone hear teachers? So I'm sure you probably know, if you have kids that come into your class at a lot lower level, it is hard, if not impossible, to catch those kids up. And a lot of parents expect you to. Can you guys agree with that? A lot of parents want you to work miracles, but meanwhile they haven't done anything at home. And it's hard. And they show, actually, by 8 years old, if you look at the kids who are not reading at level at 8 years old, only 1 in 8 will ever get back to level. Okay, so it is hard. So we want to do this early. We want to give them more words to use when they're younger. And we're also giving them background knowledge. So I mentioned earlier, when they're reading, they're getting background knowledge. If you look out your front door, you're not really going to, well, I don't know where you live, but where I live, I don't see castles and moats and dolphins, and we have trains, and I grew up with some cows, but, all these different things that your child's not going to experience, but they experience through books. And I personally had never really thought about it, like, well, gee, how else would they have known about that? Because I read them a story with it, or because you talked about it, or you saw pictures, or different things. So you're giving them all this background knowledge with the books as well. And this is going to give meaning, to the words. And when they do get to school, they are going to have some of this information. So if a teacher says, "Oh, there are dolphins," and a child that's like, "Well, I don't know what that is," you're not going to have that. So that's always a good thing too. Children who go into school with the vocabulary, with the background knowledge, are going to do better. And they've actually been shown that vocabulary is a prime predictor of success on entering kindergarten. So if you look at kids going into kindergarten and you measure their vocabulary, the kids who have the highest vocabulary, the majority of the time are going to do better through their entire school career than the kids who go into kindergarten with a lower vocabulary. And it's scary. You think that one little factor, you look at vocabulary in kindergarten, and you can predict how well they're going to do throughout their entire school career. And most of the time it's true. There are rare exceptions, of course, there always are, but for the most part, it's a very, very good predictor. And how do they get this better vocabulary? By reading to them. Great. You guys are so quick. So again, there's so many factors for reading success, and they start very, very early in life. And it's been a lot of people theorize that we could get rid of so many reading difficulties and reading issues and problems if parents just read to their kids a lot more often, starting very early. That we could, they wouldn't be in, behind in a lot of things whenever they get to school. Again, a lot of parents don't know this, and it was funny to hear Tracy Bild. Was it yesterday, or was it the supervisor day? She was saying, I knew that I should read to my kids before bedtime, but I never really thought about the fact that I should be reading to them in the morning or in the afternoon. I just didn't think about it till I was here last year. And you would think, wow, look at her. She should know that she should read to her kids multiple times per day. And people just don't, or they don't think about it, or you get busy because it's not in the forefront of your mind, or you don't realize just how important it is. So we have the great position where we can educate people as well and tell them, well, we're not just trying to sell you books. We are trying to teach you that these can really help your child throughout their entire life. Because teachers can only do so much, Right. So we need to read aloud to our kids, right? I think we all know that. And this begs the question, starting when? I heard someone say birth. Yep. And you can read to them before they're born. That's fine too. But as soon as they're born, you start reading to them. And my husband, he works for Intel. So one of his colleagues, is very educated, white collar. His wife had a baby. And so when he came back he was off for a few days. He came back. Everyone was congratulating him. And my husband, being the great husband he is, said, well, if you need any books for your son, just let me know. I'll give you my wife's business card. Isn't he sweet? And the guy said, well, he won't need books till he's 3 or 4. And my husband came home and told me the story, and I swear to you, my heart almost stopped. And I said, he was kidding, right? And he goes, I don't think he was kidding. I was like, well, then he's an idiot. I'm like, I hope his wife is smarter than him. I'm like, give this to your wife. Give this card to your wife. And it just amazes me. And I've had people say, oh, well, we'll get to the books later. They're little. They really don't need any right now. And you go, no, you need them. And you speak to them, like you talk to them, you hold your little baby and you talk to them, why not read to them? At 0 to 6 months old, they're really not getting or understanding the language, okay? But they are getting that bonding time, and you are teaching them that reading is a pleasurable thing, that you're going to hold them and talk to them and show them, and they'll start 3, 4, 5 months old reaching out and touching the touchy-feely books. And just, grinning. And if you hear stories of people saying, oh, when I say to my 5-month-old, let's read a book, they get all excited and they start wiggling and, and squirming and smiling around. They get it. And they know, oh, mommy's going to hold me and take that thing out that we turn and touch. And, they don't know what it is. It's a book. But it's a pleasurable thing. And you are conditioning them to realize that, and to enjoy that. Again, the whole human nature pleasurable aspect. And this is going to start building their listening skills in their early reading enjoyment, because then you continue this as they get older and they just know what books are and they know how to interact with books. And I've had people, they're like, they don't start trying to read, it's like their kids are 2 or 3 years old and they're like, oh, they don't sit still for a second. But they're like, well, they're just starting to try and read to them. Like, they don't know that they're supposed to sit still to read a book. You can't just take this crazy toddler who's running around with all this energy and be like, okay, now you sit still for 20 minutes while mommy reads to you. They're not going to do it, right, most of the time. So when you start early, they are learning that, they sit and you cuddle and you listen. And again, you want to make it fun. And, in our books, we all know our books are just, they're perfect for this early time, right? We've got so many great books. And, and I did have a few books that that I had brought in, and I have That's Not My Puppy, and I brought That's Not My Puppy. You guys, I'm sure, all know what That's Not My Puppy looks like. I brought this because this was one of our favorites in my house, and this was a book that I had gotten long before I joined Usborne, in the touchy-feely books. And Peter Usborne tells us about he wants the books to be edible. He wants the kids to just want to eat them up. And both figuratively and literally, because they're non-toxic and all those great things. So we can present, because the kids, they're going to be chomping on the books because that's what babies do, and they drool on them. And so we have so many great, we've got the touchy-feelies, the bath books, the cloth books. And so when you have people with infants, who are, worried about, well, they'll rip the pages, well, we've got solutions for them, right? And these, this touchy-feelies is very physical for these babies. Like I said, at very young ages, they'll start reaching out and touching the different textures, and you can talk to them about it. Oh, isn't that so soft? Isn't that rough? All these, and they're learning, from those young ages. Things like That's Not My Puppy, or any of the That's Not Mine. A lot of ours, they have all the repetition. And repetition is very important. And I don't know if any of you have ever had if any of your children have ever wanted to read the same book over and 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 over. Mm-hmm. It drives you crazy after a while, doesn't it? The complete book of Farmyard Tales, my son was 2 3/4-ish. He decided he loved Farmyard Tales. Who can blame him, right? It's great. And it was our bedtime book. We read other books during the day, but at night it had to be Farmyard Tales. And if I tried to suggest anything else, it was, no, Farmyard Tales! 8.5 months, we read the Farmyard Tales, 1 story a night. We had that book memorized, I'll tell you. And after the first 4 months, I had to keep telling myself, repetition is important, because thank goodness there are 20 stories in the book. I might have ended up in the mental institution from reading the book over and over and over and over. But every time they read something again, they are learning more about it. They are getting something else out of it. It might be driving you crazy, but they are getting something else out of it. And it actually is very comforting for children. These kids, they don't have a lot of control in their lives. We tell them what to do, when to do it, but they get the sense of control from the repetition. It's a predictability. They know what's going to happen next. They start to associate with the characters in the story. They become their buddies. My son at bedtime would say, "That's Mommy and Daddy and Poppy and Sam and their dog called Rusty." And then I would say, "Well, what about your sister?" And he would look at me, and I'm like, "You pray to your sister too, or you're not going to read that book anymore." And he's like, "Fine, Francesca too," because he knew the characters, and they bond, and it gets a pleasurable thing that they gives them that, again, the comfort, the predictability, and they are getting little language cues from those books. Kids can actually teach themselves phonics. If they'll memorize the book, right? They'll be able to recite it word for word. You guys have kids who they have a book and they can recite it. My daughter does this. "I can read this mazy book to you," and she turns the pages and she reads it, but she's not really reading it. It's memorized, but it's a wonderful first step because they memorize it, and then at some point they start to associate the words in their head with the printed words on the page. Right, this is Apple Tree Farm. So everyone, that's memorized. This is Apple Tree Farm. This is Miss Booth Farmer. There's two children, Poppy and Sam, and a dog called Rusty. First page, every story. And my son be like, "I want to read that." And so he would, read it. And then after a while, I noticed he was looking at the words as he would read it. And then he was picking out the words. "Oh, look, there's farm, there's tractor, there's Rusty." There's picking out the words on other pages. And they will actually learn if they see the word, see the word ball and book and, all these B words, their brains will figure out that B says buh. Right? And this is how those early fluent readers can then go read other things, because it starts with memorization, it starts with repetition, and then it goes into them making the connections in their head and extrapolating information from it and applying it. So after the 8.5 months of reading Farmyard Tales, that's when my son picked up another book and he just started reading it. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, unbelievable." So that's great. So you've got your early readers, repetition is good throughout. And then kids get this stage, the psychologists call it labeling the environment. And this is the driving mom crazy stage. It's the what's that, what's this, how does this work, what's that called? And they just want to know what everything is. And we have great books for that too. So I have the first 1,000 words, and you guys know what the first 1,000 words looks like inside. Does everyone know if you haven't seen it? It has all the pictures and then the word. So you can point at the pictures. Well, what's that? It has the word beneath it. So now they're seeing the written word as well as the picture. And we've got, the Look and Say books and a lot of different things in the series that are great for that toddler labeling the environment stage. And it also is great, for an early reading skill, because they're not just seeing the word and asking you about it. And you can talk about the pictures, but they're seeing the little printed word underneath the picture. And that they'll start to associate again. If they see the truck and it says truck, they'll start to realize that, oh, that T sound, that letter there must be like, or the CK at the end says K. So they start to do all those things in that labeling the environment. All right, and it's not, I had requested it, but it's not here, but everyone knows about the Mouse About the House, right? And the Squirrel's Tale, the slot books. And these are always, Mouse About the House was briefly knocked out of #1 by How Big is a Million, right? And then it went right back into the #1 spot and it regained its title. Because the kids love these books. They're interactive. And this is the thing, when you are reading to your children, you want it to be interactive. And some of the books foster that a little easier than others, things like The Mouse About the House, where they're physically interacting with the book. But even when you're reading any book to them, you want you want to talk to them about it, or you want to, point out things to them, or you want to make sure that they're involved and they're not just the passive person sitting there while you're reading to them. And I had read, and I think it was in the Jim Trelease book, Read Aloud Handbook. I think it was in his book. He had said, you want reading to be like playing ping pong, not darts. Right? You want it to go back and forth. You don't want to just throw things and see what sticks. And that's true of any book, because you want the reading to be fun. You want it to be, there should be laughter, should be carrying on. And I think it was yesterday, Tracy was saying The Mouse About the House, her son just giggles and squeals and has a great time. And this is what is fostering the love of books. Again, the whole pleasurable thing. If you're just sitting there reading to them and they're like, well, Mommy, what's that? And you're like, shh, I got to turn the page, and a lot of people read to their kids like that, like, turn the page. You got to get through, read every page. Okay, we're done, close the book, go to bed. And it's not fun, right? And the kid's like, oh, God, we got to read a story. You gotta read a story. You want it to be fun. You want it to be very interactive. And something like There's a Mouse About the House helps you do that because, you turn the page like, oh, there's the mouse, there's the squirrel, let's do it again. All the fun things where you go back and forth. And you guys, I don't know if you know, those books have wonderful pre-reading and pre-writing skills as well. And since I started telling my customers about this, they've been a lot more excited about it. Like, they're usually excited about it because they think it'll keep their kids busy, but then they're excited about it because they feel like it's going to keep their kids busy, and it also has valuable skills because it's teaching them left to right. Left to right is not a natural thing for people. We're not born knowing to read left to right. And so you have to train your subconscious to do it. Like, look left, when you open a book. And actually, when you open a book, if you think about it, you have a book, and you open it, your eyes actually fall on the right side of the page because you're opening the left side. So your brain has to be trained, and we just do it naturally because we know to look to the left. And a lot of kids don't do this. And my son is left-handed, and so he has very, very strong right to left tendencies. So anything that just gets him to do the left first is great. So there's very little subtle skills like that. It teaches them how to interact with a book because they have to turn the pages one at a time. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen a kid take the Mouse About the House or the Squirrel's Tale, and they put the squirrel through, and they turn like 6 pages, and they can't find it, right? Because they're in such a hurry, and they just, especially when they're little. And so they have to be gentle. They have to turn the pages one at a time, or they're not going to find the mouse or the squirrel popping out. So it's all these early skills for the younger kids, and then the older kids you get into, there's obviously text, so all the reading aspect as well. And then the fine motor skills and the hand-eye coordination, and those are great pre-writing skills because when they start to learn to write, they trace over little dotted lines to do their letters, when they're in preschool and kindergarten. And our book has a little dotted trail that you got to follow. And I really noticed this with my daughter. She just could not get that follow the trail and stick the mouse through. Like, she was trying to shove him through, like, rear end first, and she just was not getting it. And it was right about the time she got it where I noticed she really started kind of scribbling and doodling and tracing over things with a pencil as well. So all that fun hand-eye coordination stuff. I tell people, too, we want to make sure that whenever we are educating our kids, we don't just want to educate their minds, but we want to educate their hearts, right? We want them to be good people. And Usborne has so many books that are great for this. And I'm sorry, but Captain Underpants is not going to teach my kid to be a good person, right? But if you look at, our first reading series where, we've got the Aesop's Fables, there's the Fox and the Crow up here and the Sun and the Wind, and our fairy tales and all of these things that have a moral or that have a lesson. So you're getting that kind of double duty. You're getting the reading and the vocabulary and the background and all that great stuff, but you're also teaching, them these little lessons and these little morals. And it's very, very interesting because here in the United States especially, I don't know why in our country we do this, but a lot of people tend to shy away from like the original versions of the fairy tales. Like whether they're too scary or they're too, they're not politically correct. Or I had a neighbor who wouldn't sing Three Blind Mice to her kids because of the chop off the tails of the carving knife, because it's horrible. I'm like, oh, come on, it's fun. She would not sing it to her kids. And so many people are like that. I'm like, well, Hansel and Gretel, they push the witch in the oven, she's going to eat them, all these things. But, when you look at fairy tales have been around since forever, like thousands of years. They are in every civilization, in every nation on Earth. And we're the only ones that try and change them. And you're like, why? What is it about these stories that have just transcended time? I mean, there's over 700 versions of Cinderella. They're not all the Disney version. And there's something about these stories. Like, why are they important? They're not just cute little stories. That they have, basically been, like I said, transcended time and been in every civilization. And the thing is that kids are not dumb. Okay, kids know that everything is not always happy and hunky-dory all the time. And if all you read them are little, blow little roses at you stories and things, they figure it out. They know that everything isn't always good. I mean, they go to school and someone bullies them, or they, don't get the toy they want. They, no matter what scale, I mean, there are kids out there with horrible things in their lives. They have lost parents, they have been abused, and you try and read them all, everything is roses. They're not buying it. Right? Kids know that it's a cold, cruel world out there, and we can't shelter them forever. And when you expose them to different things within your home, when you are there and they have that safety, they learn to deal with them, and they learn, how to overcome them. And with fairy tales, you think about it, fairy tales usually have, very, very clear lines, good and evil, right? And usually the good triumphs. I mean, isn't this a great lesson? So you have someone, a child going through a horrible adversity, and it gives them this sense of hope. I mean, you're teaching them that, if you persist and you prevail, you can overcome any odds, you can overcome any foe, that things may not be great all the time, but, there are consequences for actions when you do things wrong. And in my research, I found it very, very interesting that it has been shown that children who are not exposed to these type of stories, whether they're fairy tales or stories with other morals, children who have not been exposed to these type of stories are more likely to become juvenile offenders. They literally cannot imagine the consequences of their actions. They don't get that whole good, bad, how what I'm doing is affecting someone else, consequences. They don't get it. And there are rehabilitation programs and the facilities for the juvenile offenders, and part of their rehabilitation is they will read them stories like fairy tales. They are trying to teach them a conscience. Isn't that amazing? You think it's something like, oh, fairy tales. They use them to help these kids who have no sense of right and wrong. So these are great things to expose our kids to. And we have a lot of them, whether it's the young readers or the first readers or the picture book series or the Aesop's fables and all these different things. We have such great classic stories. I mean, it's not just, fluff, right? We have great things. I talked about repetition. Let's see. Now, when you're reading to your child, and as I said, when you're reading, you want to make it interactive. You want to play ping pong, not darts. And you want to make it fun, and you want, you want to use the books as a jumping off point for discussion. So again, you don't want to be, you got to read every word on the page and you close the book and you're done. It's been shown that if you read, people who read to their children with some explanation, like if you come to a word you don't think they understand and you say, oh, that means this, or what do you think about this, and you have some discussion along with the book or some explanation, those children, where's my statistic here? Those children get twice the vocabulary gain than if you just read them the book straight out. And I've been trying to do this myself just a little bit more when I'm reading aloud. If there's a word I think they may not know, I'll say, the word and then like a synonym for it that I know that they understand, or I'll ask my son, well, what do you think that word means? Or that type of thing, because, you don't want it to just go over their heads. And again, you're making it more interactive, and, they're not just eyes glazing over because they don't know what you're reading to them. All right, so we read to our kids, right? We all know that. When do we stop reading to them? You don't, right? And this was the second point by the Commission on Readings, was that the process of reading aloud to your children should continue throughout the grades. Now, a lot of times what happens is kids learn to read, right? And there it's like first grade or second grade, they get better at it. And when they learn to read, the parents stop reading to them, or it really diminishes. They say, well, you can read, go read a book to yourself. And I think it's something we don't really think about. A lot of people don't think about. They're like, well, why do I have to read to them? They know how to read. But the fact is that children's listening levels are so much higher than their reading levels. So you can read a first grade or fifth grade level books, and they understand them and they're perfectly acceptable, but their reading ability is not at the point where they could read it themselves yet. And that listening and reading skills really don't converge until about 8th grade or a little after. So you want to make sure you keep reading to them. And the older a child is, unfortunately, the less they're usually read to at home, just because it's not a priority anymore. They know how to read. I don't need to read to them. Then you're losing that pleasurable experience. So you think about it. You have these little kids in kindergarten, and if you go into their class and you say, who likes books? Who wants to learn to read? And they're all like, what? Yeah, I do. They're all excited, and they're so naive and fresh and young. And then you go into a 3rd or 4th grade classroom, and you say, who loves books? And you'll have the couple like, I do. And you'll have the few like this, their hands up kind of half-heartedly. And you'll have the few muttering, I hate to read. Hate that. Well, why? What happened? It's just a couple of years. But it's been shown that if you look at like graphs of, parents reading to their children starts dropping off right about 2nd through 4th grade, and kids' dislike of reading jumps up in that same time period. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. Right. You want to show them there's more out there than their level. There's more things. You want to keep continuing to expose them to higher vocabulary and to more knowledge, and keep that bonding time. If you stop reading to your kids when they're in school, what are they left with? Textbooks. They're not fun to read usually. They're pretty dry. So now you're giving them a textbook. Read it. It's dry, and you're going to be tested on it. Okay. The pleasurable aspect of reading has just hit the floor. Where if they go home and now you're sitting and you're reading with them and you're laughing and you're talking and you're having fun, well, gee, books aren't so bad after all, right? So you do that. And, and one of the important things about this, about reading above a child's level that they can read at, if you have a first grader learning to read, you should not be reading them Hop on Pop, because that is a book for them to read. Right, you want to read above the level that they can read at, and that was something I hadn't really thought about. You think, oh, well, I'm going to read them books that they could read. Well, why? They can read them. I want to keep exposing them to new and greater things out there. I mean, you don't want to be boring them. They're like, gosh, Mom, I could read that myself. Yeah. So we want to keep that pleasurable experience, and we want to have that bonding time, because when kids get older, especially once they start getting that middle school or those tween years. The subject matter in books gets a little heavier, and it might, have some issues, whether it's bullying, whether it's, adolescence, whether it's fears, whether it's eating disorders, any of these types of things. And so if you're reading with them and to them, this is a prime opportunity for them to open up to you, or for you to just even talk about the characters in the book in case it's something that's going, through their heads, or something that they're thinking about or having an issue with. So you're creating the opportunity, to have this conversation and this bonding with your child. And as kids get older, it does get harder, and I'm not saying you're going to read to them, you're going to read to your 13-year-old in the morning, at lunchtime, and at bedtime, but, you do want to try and maintain that as much as you can, and pick things that are, appropriate, or something they're interested in, or keep it short and keep it fun. So it is possible. It's better that, you can do it when they're younger, and kind of create that. You want to start reading your kids when they're 13, but yeah. So let's talk just for a couple minutes, and I don't have much time, but we're going to talk a couple minutes about how to read to your children. When you are reading to your kids, you want to make it fun, you want to make it entertaining, you want to make a rollicking good time, and you don't want to go over the top so they're just rolling their eyes at you, but you want to have a good time, and so they're going to enjoy it. And there are different things that you can do with your voice, and there are actually 7 different things. You can talk loud or soft, fast or slow, high or low, and then you can pause for dramatic effect. So these different things. And you can do facial expressions in your face and your eyes. And again, you don't want to, be crazy like a caricature of yourself, but, let the story guide you to do the different things. And you want the first line to jump out and grab them. You don't be like, once upon a time, blah, 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 blah. Be like, you want to, kind of, say it with meaning and with feeling, so that they're going to be like, oh, what's going to happen next? And the most important thing is about reading to make the story satisfying is the last line. And we're in a hurry, it's bedtime, and you read it, da-da-da, the end, go to bed. But you want to draw that last line out. You want to make it just satisfying, and oh, when you finish that last line, you're like, wow, wasn't that a good story? So you read it slowly and with feeling, and just make it delicious. And I have 5 minutes, but I'm going to do an example, because I did this at Northeast Regionals, and everyone thought it was entertaining. So sometimes I'll do an example, like when I do my workshops, of how to read to kids. Does anyone have poems for young children? If you don't have this book, get it. A lot of us don't think about reading poetry to kids. I think we're all still scarred from high school, English class, where they make you, what did the author mean? And so we're like, poetry, but kids often love poetry because it's something different. It can be fun, it can be wacky. And this poem's for young children. I mean, it's got E.E. Cummings, it's got Philip Hawthorne, it's got all kinds of people. But there's an anonymous poem in here that my kids, it's their favorite. And I think because it is so fun and goofy, it's called The Hairy Toe. Do you guys know that, toe, hairy? And I pick on my husband all the time. My husband is getting much better, but this is how he would read. Once there was a woman went out to pick beans, and she found a hairy toe. She told her about the wah, 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 hello, Charlie Brown. And my kids would listen. Yay, they'd just smile. And then I read them the story, and they're like, oh, they're under the covers, and they're carrying on. So I read it like this, She took the hairy toe home with her, and that night, when she went to bed, the wind began to moan and groan, and away off in the distance, she seemed to hear a voice crying, "Where's my hairy toe? Who's got my hairy toe?" And the woman scrooched down way under the covers. And about that time, the wind appeared to hit the house, and it swooshed, and it creaked and cracked like something was trying to get in. My kids are like, oh my God, a hairy toe. And so there I am in the grocery store, and my daughter just turned 4 on Wednesday, but she's got this crazy wild curly hair, and she's this tiny little thing, and she's got this crazy hair, and she carries around her copy of A Midsummer's Night Dream. How many 3-year-olds carry around Midsummer Night Dream? It's her favorite book. She's like, the guy's head turns into a donkey head, ha ha ha. And she's holding that book, and she's going, where's my Harry too? And people in the grocery store looking at us, I'm like, hi. Here's my card. Right. So they love it. And if any of you have heard Becky Thompson talk or seen her literacy 50 literacy things to do at a show, she talks a lot about the different things that you can do, like the spontaneous reading games where you take a book and you hold it upside down and they go, no, that's not how you hold the book, and they laugh at you because you're just so silly, mommy. Again, making it fun, and it doesn't all have to be about sitting there and just reading every little thing. And when you're reading a book that rhymes, I'm going to talk really fast. When you're reading a book that rhymes, you can leave out the word at the end of a sentence and see if your child can fill it in. Rhyming is so important. In fact, if you've got a child who goes to kindergarten who can't complete simple rhymes, this is a red flag for later reading problems. So if you're reading them something like Ted and Friends, Ted Shed. Ted and his friends work on in the sun. They huff and they puff, but it's lots of fun. If they can't fill it in, this gives them good practice. Leave it out. Let them fill it in. And it also helps them when they're learning to read because they can anticipate what the word's going to be. And if they can read Ted, they can read Shed, they can read Bed, all of those different things. I'm going to wrap it up by saying, in summary, reading aloud is the most important thing that you can do or you can teach your parents and your customers or your friends or your family to do with their kids. You want to read to them as much as possible. You want to continue it for as long as they are living in your house. You want to make it fun. You want to make it silly. You want to make it interactive. You want to make it pleasurable because we want our kids to become lifetime readers. Okay? All right. Thank you, guys. And I took us right up to the wire, so I don't know if we have time for questions, but if you do have any, you can come up and chat with me for a couple of minutes before we got to head to our next session.